Chapter 2. A New Apostolate. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre would have earned a distinguished and honored place in the history of the Church, even if he had finally retired from public life in 1968, as he had originally intended. No one had done more for the Church in Africa in this century. No one had done more to uphold the true faith during Vatican II. But the most important task for which God had destined him had not even begun. When he retired in 1968, he could not have imagined that God had reserved for him what was possibly the most important role assigned to any prelate during this century. An exaggeration? Monsignor Lefebvre was to be given the task of preserving the Catholic priesthood in the West during what is proving to be a period of universal apostasy. But he did not seek to undertake this task. He was sought out by the young men who proved to be the first seminarians of Icone. But when they came, they were quite unknown to him. And as for Icone, he did not even know of its existence. The young men had been sent to the Archbishop because they wished to become priests, but could find no seminary offering a truly traditional Catholic formation. They had asked older priests for advice and had been told to go to Monsignor Lefebvre. He was reluctant at first, but they insisted. He told them that if he undertook their direction, their studies would be long and intense, and they would lead a life of prayer and sacrifice, the formation necessary to prepare them for the priesthood in these times. They insisted that this was what they wanted. But where could they study? Unfortunately, nowhere suitable could be found in Rome itself. But an old friend, Monsignor Charrière, Bishop of Lausanne, Geneva, and Fribourg, suggested that the students pursue their studies at the University of Fribourg. The priestly fraternity of St. Pius X was established in his diocese on All Saints' Day, 1970, with all of the necessary canonical formalities. Alas, it soon became clear that this university was infected with modernism and liberalism. With the approval of Monsignor Nestor Adam, Bishop of Sion, Monsignor Lefebvre obtained a large house which had belonged to the canons of St. Bernard in this diocese. The house was at Icone, no more than a hamlet near the small town of Ried, in the Catholic canton of Valais. The name of Icone is now known throughout the world, and thousands of visitors from all over the world come there each year. But until the foundation of the Seminary of St. Pius X, it is doubtful whether the name would have meant anything to anyone not living in the immediate vicinity. The seminary was formally opened on October 7, 1970. A fascinating account of the events leading up to its acquisition by Monsignor Lefebvre was provided by Father Pierre Epigny, parish priest of Ried, in an address which he gave at the opening of the Priory of St. Pius V at Shawinigan-Sud, Quebec, on March 19, 1977. Father Epigny spoke from his heart as a priest and a pastor. The circumstances in which this saintly young priest was deprived of his parish are described under the date June 15, 1975. Father Epigny's account follows. My dear colleagues and Canadian friends, I am not going to talk abstractions. All I want to do is give my own testimony, for Providence willed that I should be the first eyewitness of what happened at Icone. 10 years ago, I was appointed parish priest of Ried, in which Icone is situated. That was in 1967. At that time, Icone was nothing in particular. Only one canon of the great St. Bernard remained, and he just looked after some dogs and a few calves. The place was up for sale. In 1968, on May 31st, the feast of the Queenship of the Blessed Virgin Mary, one of my parishioners, Alphonse Pedroni, overheard a member of the Communist Party say in a local cafe, "Icone is for sale, and we're buying it, and the first thing we'll do is destroy the chapel." Alphonse went home, took up the telephone, and called the canon. "Is it true that Icone is for sale?" "Yes, it's true." "I'll buy it at the price you've been offered." He found 4 friends to help him buy that house and ensure that it kept its religious character. The property had belonged to the canons of St. Bernard for over 600 years. These 5 men improved the land. In our country it is all vineyards. And they waited for the providential moment. Then one day Monsignor Lefebvre appeared. He was in touch with some young men who wanted to become priests. He had tried opening a house in Fribourg in Switzerland, but it had become too small. Providence led him to a meeting with these men who were happy to put the house they had bought at his disposal. I shall always remember that visit of Monsignor Lefebvre's. We had a meal together in a local restaurant. He did not know us. He seemed perplexed at the attitude of Monsieur Pedroni, who had said not a word all during the meal. In the end, Monsignor Lefebvre urged him to say something. "Listen, Monsignor, we are happy to entrust that house to you. I should just like to say this. Icone will soon be known throughout the whole world." During the difficult summer we have just lived through at Icone, Monsignor Lefebvre reminded me of that. Alphonse was a true prophet. As for me, what opened my eyes was a retraining course for priests 10 years ordained at Montana in Switzerland. It was to last 15 days. I stuck it out for 10. Then I left and went on pilgrimage to Fatima. Back home, I told myself I must do something. Things could not go on as they were. The theories taught in this retraining were not the Catholic faith we were taught in the seminary. They were hazy theories leading nowhere. So I thought, you're no theologian. You're not going to write articles for the papers. You're just a parish priest. You must try to adopt at least 2 supernatural means to try to stem the damage and restore the parish. With the smallest proportion of practicing Catholics in the whole country, some enthusiasm, and a little more love of God. I decided to begin with the rosary every day, and on Thursday evenings before the Blessed Sacrament, I decided to go back to the traditional Mass, but with the Epistle and Gospel in French, and every Friday to hold catechism classes for adults. I was astonished at the graces received. The people came. I had 100 to 150 at catechism class. I was amazed, and preparing catechism did me a lot of good, because it made me go back over the whole of traditional doctrine. People came to say the rosary, including a good pagan. I had to build a church, but I had nothing. I turned to St. Joseph. I thanked him specially this morning on his feast day. He has given me such help. We managed to overcome all the difficulties so well that the bishop himself, the day he came to consecrate the church, said to me, "You can thank God. I know this parish. There were not even 2 men who came to Mass before." He was himself a canon of St. Bernard and had been parish priest at Icone, so he knew the people. You can thank God. What I have seen this morning is beyond anything I could have ever imagined. So I am telling you that I have been well rewarded spiritually and materially. And then Providence pitched the Icone Seminary into my parish. You can imagine how interested I was seeing what was going on, for these newcomers do exactly the opposite of what the retrainees are doing. Monsignor Adam, my bishop, was also interested. On 2 occasions he asked me to pick him up and bring him to the seminary. He was delighted with what he saw there. Of course, there were others, incited by the French progressives, who took a poor view of it. But at last the enterprise started, and I saw the seminarians arriving one by one. The first week at Icone, they had nothing, so they came to eat at my table. For example, I witnessed the arrival of Denis Roche, a converted Protestant, an engineer. I shall not forget his first visit. After we had talked for an hour, he said to me, "Father, Providence arranged for us to meet today. If you please, shall we say a decade of the Rosary together?" We knelt down in the room. It's not every day that you meet a young man like that, a convert from Protestantism, who says to his parish priest after a conversation, "Shall we say a decade of the Rosary?" So I witnessed the birth and the growth of this great work. I had the good fortune to be close to Monsignor Lefebvre and to learn much from him. I can therefore tell you, without fear of being mistaken, he is truly a man of God. He is a good and great missionary. Someone said to me one day, "He makes me think of St. Pius X." Yes, that is so. He has only one desire, that our Lord Jesus Christ shall reign over all hearts, all families, all nations, and that souls shall be saved, for he is a missionary. He does not theorize. He can talk very simply to people because his purpose is the conversion of people. He wants all souls to go to heaven. I remember one day a year ago, Cardinal Tiandoum, Archbishop of Dakar, was with me. He had come to talk me into the new Mass. I let him talk, and then I said, "Listen, Your Eminence, do you know who Monsignor Lefebvre is? Must I, a simple parish priest, remind you of what he has done for you in Dakar? Your Eminence, who made you a priest?" "Monsignor Lefebvre." "Your Eminence, who founded the major seminary?" "Monsignor Lefebvre." "Eminence, who made the Archdiocese of Dakar?" "Monsignor Lefebvre." "Eminence, who made the Dakar Carmel?" "Monsignor Lefebvre." "And Eminence, who made the monastery of Vieta in Dakar?" "Monsignor Lefebvre. He is my father, and I am his son. You're right." "Well then, Eminence, now that Monsignor Lefebvre finds himself in a situation like this, attacked, calumniated, ridiculed, dare you let your father be so defamed and say nothing?" My comment made him weep. "Then it is your duty to defend your father and to defend Holy Church. I know you're too afraid. You must not be afraid, especially when you are invested with authority. What do you risk? Losing your position? Losing your life? Good! You will go to heaven." As for Monsignor Lefebvre, he has no fear. Yet his temperament is very gentle. There is nothing swaggering or bellicose about him. But I have rarely in my life met a man with such courage, such strength of will, such firmness and decision, such persistence and perseverance. And I can say, for I lived with him at his side this difficult summer, that he has come to the fight this year with redoubled courage. Providence has blessed him with extraordinary powers. For humanly speaking, he should have been crushed. That proves we are dealing with a man of God. I think Providence has made us a great present in giving us this missionary. That is just what the opposition is now most afraid of. For the missionary in Monsignor Lefebvre has set about having children. You might laugh at that remark, but it is true. It was thought that Vatican II had won. A few old priests were still resisting, but they would die off. The matter was clear. The whole post-conciliar renewal would be put into effect as well as in the great cities as in the African bush, and they were already rubbing their hands. Then, all of a sudden, in a tiny corner of Switzerland, an archbishop appears who sets about having children, giving to the church priests who celebrate the traditional Mass. So the enemy, occupying a strong position in the Vatican, saw red and trained all of its guns on Icone. And Icone, till then unknown, became famous the world over. Last year, because of the ordinations, the Vatican launched a press campaign to discredit Monsignor Lefebvre and his young priests, to have them taken for schismatics and rebels. But that very press campaign turned against the Vatican, for when people have been able to see and hear Monsignor Lefebvre, their Catholic faith has revived, and they have said, "He is the one who is right. He at least can be known for what he is. We can see that he is an archbishop and that his priests are true priests. As for the others, we do not know what they are." So a large part of public opinion turned in favor of Monsignor Lefebvre and his work. Thus ends Father Epiney's account. It soon became known that there was an Orthodox seminary in Switzerland. More young men with vocations came forward, and financial support began to arrive, first from Switzerland and France, then Germany, then Britain, Australia, the USA, and now from all over the world. Monsignor Lefebvre has rejected as totally false the claims that Icone relies for its support on rich European industrialists or American millionaires. There are a few large donations, which are very welcome, and why not? But the major part of financial support for Icone is made up of tens of thousands of small gifts, the sacrifices mainly of Catholics of modest means or even the very poor. The Archbishop has made St. Joseph responsible for the financial support of the seminary and has had no cause for complaint. The number of vocations was so great that an ambitious building program was undertaken. 3 new wings have been added to the seminary, and it is now able to house 140 seminarians and their professors in accommodation of high quality. In fact, all the facilities of the seminary, the lecture hall, the kitchen, dining hall, and living accommodation are almost certainly of a far higher standard than those of any other seminary in Europe. This was to a certain extent a matter of necessity, as the standards demanded by the Swiss planning authorities are very high. It was even necessary to incorporate, at very great cost, an atomic bomb-proof shelter, a feature which is obligatory in all new public buildings in Switzerland. I have tried to evoke the spirit of the seminary and life there in Chapter 6, which includes an account of my first visit to Icone in 1975. In its early years, the seminary received the enthusiastic support of at least some sections of the Vatican, that of Cardinal Wright, prefect of the Congregation for the Clergy, in particular. A letter which he wrote in 1971 expressing his satisfaction at the progress of the seminary is reproduced in Appendix 5. He was still recommending young men with vocations to apply for admission to Icone as late as 1973. I possess the written testimony of one of the seminarians to this effect. Houses have also been opened in a number of other countries, one of them at Albano, near Rome. This house at Albano was obtained with all of the authorization required by canon law. It is being used at present for the religious order for women founded by the Archbishop, but will eventually be used for 6th-year training for the newly ordained priests of the society. This will not only free accommodation at Icone for new entrants, but, in Monsignor Lefebvre's own words, will also enable our young priests to draw upon all of the resources of the eternal Rome, its tradition, its martyrs, its magisterium, its monuments, and also to deepen their attachment to the Bishop of Rome, the successor of Peter. The aim of the seminary is to form good and true priests, devoted to our Lord, to Our Lady, to the Church, and to the Mass, men burning with pastoral zeal. The Archbishop is convinced that such a formation can be achieved only by means of a traditional seminary formation based above all on Thomism and the traditional Latin liturgy. This view certainly seems to be confirmed by the position in France, where half of the major seminaries have already been closed. In France, between 1963 and 1973, there was an 83% drop in the number of men studying for the priesthood. In 1963, there were 917 seminary entrants. In 1973, there were only 151. So great indeed is the excess of priests who die or abandon the priesthood over the number of new ordinations to replace them, that a spokesman for the French Bishops' Conference has gone so far as to suggest the ordination of married men as a possible solution. There is, incidentally, a very high dropout rate in the remaining French seminaries, 422 students having dropped out in 1973. Should this trend continue, it is quite within the bounds of possibility that within 10 years, the Society of St. Pius X could be ordaining more priests than all of the seminaries in France put together. There can be no doubt that it was the escalating success of Icone in the face of the accelerating decline in the French seminary system, which initiated the campaign against Icone. It will be shown in Chapter 3 that Monsignor Lefebvre was far from popular with the more liberal French bishops, even before the council. As Appendix 8 to Pope John's council makes clear, the post-conciliar renewal in France had proved to be a debacle almost as catastrophic in its dimension as that in Holland. The success of Icone provided so dramatic a contrast to this debacle that its very existence became intolerable for some French bishops. They referred to it as Le Séminaire Sauvage, the Wildcat Seminary, giving the impression that it had been set up illegally without the authorization of the Vatican. This appellation was seized upon gleefully by the liberal Catholic press throughout the world, and soon the terms Icone and Wildcat Seminary became synonymous. In view of the frequency of the allegation that Monsignor Lefebvre established his seminary without canonical authorization, the canonical status of the seminary at Icone is examined in some detail in Appendix 5. At this point, I will refer briefly to some of the evidence which makes it quite clear that the seminary was established legally. First, at no stage in the campaign against Icone did any Vatican spokesman ever allege that the canonical basis of the seminary was in doubt. Had there been any weakness in the canonical status of Icone, the Vatican would certainly have used this in its campaign to discredit the Archbishop. On the contrary, in 1974, 2 apostolic visitors were dispatched by the Vatican to conduct an official inspection of the seminary. The letter of condemnation sent to Monsignor Lefebvre by the Commission of Cardinals stated that the society, no longer having a juridical basis, its foundations and notably the seminary at Icone, lose by the same act the right to existence. Obviously, the Vatican would not conduct an official inspection of an unofficial seminary, nor would it withdraw the right to exist from a seminary which had never possessed such a right. Definite proof that the Society of St. Pius X and the seminary enjoyed full Vatican approval well after the foundation of Icone is provided by the fact that the members of 3 religious orders were transferred from their own orders to the Society of St. Pius X by the Sacred Congregation for Religious. I have documentary proof that this was done in 1972 before me as I write. The Vatican would hardly have allowed members of religious orders to be transferred to a society which had established a wildcat seminary. Again, in February of 71, Cardinal Wright wrote to Monsignor Lefebvre expressing his pleasure at the progress and expansion of the society, mentioning that it was receiving praise and approval from bishops in various parts of the world. Some have alleged that this letter could not have involved praise for the seminary because it had not yet been founded in February of 71. But on the contrary, it was formally opened on October 7, 1970. On June 6 of 1971, the Archbishop blessed the foundation stone of the new buildings, an event which some of his opponents have confused with the foundation of the seminary. Finally, bishops from a number of countries incardinated priests from Icone into their own dioceses, observing all of the required canonical procedure. This could not have taken place had the canonical basis of the seminary not been sound. The French bishops held what they believed to be a trump card. Cardinal Vio, Secretary of State, and the most powerful man at the Vatican, in de facto terms probably even more powerful than Pope Paul VI himself, as well as holding the all-powerful office of Secretary of State, Cardinal Vio controlled 12 other key Vatican positions. Icone could not be allowed to survive if the French bishops were to retain any credibility. They could count on Cardinal Vio, and with his support, there was no hope for the seminary. It had been sentenced to death. Before examining the campaign designed to implement this death sentence, it will be of considerable value if readers are enabled to form an impression of Monsignor Lefebvre for themselves. Ideally, they should meet him, but short of doing this, the best alternative is to read what he has to say about himself. Chapter 3 is an account of his life given in his own words, but this should obviously be supplemented by reading his book, A Bishop Speaks. Indeed, it is presumed throughout the present work that the reader already has a copy of this fundamental text.